A very special Mobycon Academy webinar in honor of International Women's Day on March 8th, which is Monday, but also we're celebrating the entire month of March dedicated to women with this, and launching it with this very first session, where we've got a collection of colleagues from this side of the Atlantic in the Netherlands, but also our colleagues in North America joining us, Mary and Elizabeth, who you'll see soon, and we're all sharing a bit about our experiences and our mobility stories, and hopefully shedding some light on how we can all work towards, or are already working towards, more gender equal mobility. So to kick off, we're all going to give you a bit of an idea or share a bit of our mobility story. And when I was thinking, we want to pack a lot in, and so when I was thinking about what I wanted to share, my journey has meandered a lot. And I thought what was best to share was how my personal experience has really informed my journey so far in mobility. So, I've been cycling since I was 4, mostly for recreation or to get to and from friends' houses when I was very little. But it was in 2010 when I was living in Vancouver, and my husband and I decided to sell our family car because the city of Vancouver was really investing in cycling, and decided that was how we were going to try to get around more often with our 2 children, who were 1 and 3 at the time. And through that experience of seeing the city by bicycle with kids in tow, I obviously experienced a lot of the stresses and challenges that came with a burgeoning cycling city. But what I found most startling for me was the positives. So I felt much more connected to my city, much more connected to the social environment of the people I was passing by, lots more of opportunities for those stop and chats that many of us might be familiar with. And also more connection to my kids. So because they weren't sitting behind me in a car anymore, but were in a chariot or eventually riding side by side, that social bond that we built was just a really positive thing that I thought and began to realize a lot of people didn't experience themselves. And so after 2 years of that, I began blogging as a mom blogger about cycling with kids that basically took me on this very windy path that got me sitting here. To be able to share that journey with you. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues on what they have to share, and sharing a bit more about our experience and what we can offer to help move along. So for now, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Shelley.
Yes, thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you very much for having this opportunity to celebrate a month full of women's stories here at Mobycon Academy. And my personal mobility story, there are many events, decisions, inspiring people, men and women, that helped me to have this position here. And I've definitely realized that I feel very privileged with all the opportunities I had. And I feel very privileged about all the freedom I gained throughout my life, and that I am able to make these decisions, and I feel very, encouraged to do so. That's why I want to share with you that I really got inspired by my grandma and all the opportunities I had to talk with her, and also comparing our lives, so our different generations. She was a teenager during the Second World War, and I was just looking back at pictures from 1949, and she was cycling along with when she met my grandpa by then, and I really felt the freedom they had by then. And of course, not only by cycling, but the freedom she gained as a woman throughout her life, because things are changing and developing, and every generation is different, really inspires me, and I really want to contribute to that developing change. So that's what I want to bring along. And my grandma was lucky to continue cycling till she was 85. She passed away a couple years ago, but I feel it's incredible that she had such a journey, and that she always had a lot of freedom to go to different places herself. She didn't have a driving license due to several reasons, but she was able to go to the place she wanted by bike, by public transport, and I really want to spread that to as many women and all the people around us. So that's kind of my mobility story.
Yeah, I like that. Such a nice story. Okay, and now I'd like to hear from across the pond, as it were, and hear Elizabeth.
Hello, good afternoon or good evening. My name is Elizabeth Allingham, and I'm the director of Mobycon North America, and I'm calling in from snowy Ottawa, Canada. I guess the mobility story that I talk about the most, especially with clients that might hear me speaking a bit of Dutch, is they often ask me if I'm Dutch, and of course I am not at all. But I grew up in Canada. I grew up in Eastern Ontario, in fact, and I actually spent most of my childhood, I think, in a car, like a lot of other children in my community. And I had this wonderful, life-changing opportunity because I had the opportunity to go to the Netherlands as a 17-year-old, which was part of Rotary International. And so I spent 12 months on a bicycle in all weather for the first time in my life. And this was very empowering and very eye-opening. But what happened when I came home to Canada was the part when I started questioning everything. And it caused me to kind of learn a bit about Jane Jacobs, to learn about how we plan our cities, how we plan our streets, and for who. And it has a really big impact on the work, obviously, that I do today and the career choices that I took in the field of sustainable transportation. And so having that experience helps me to kind of create those bonds between the people and the projects and the clients and the knowledge mobilization that I do each day. So that is my unique mobility story that connects me between Canada and the Netherlands.
Oh, thanks so much, Elizabeth. And yeah, what an opportunity. Now I'm older, I wish I had had that chance, but so wonderful that you could have. And now I'm going to introduce Sophie to share her mobility story.
Thank you, Melissa. So yeah, I would say my mobility story starts with my fascination for cities that I just always had. Even as a kid, I always just loved how dynamic cities are, and one of my favorite things to do is actually to walk around new cities and explore them. And I think the way a city is planned or designed plays like a really big role in how we experience the city, if we have like a good or a bad experience. And I think, growing up in Luxembourg, which is very car-centric, and then having the chance to study both in Germany and in the Netherlands and seeing how it can be done differently and seeing what a big impact mobility actually has in the way a city is shaped, just really got me, I guess, also interested in the mobility area. And then, after studying, I just decided that I want to stay in the Netherlands and applied to a bunch of places and ended up at Mobycon.
And we're glad that you did. Thank you, Shelley. And finally, we'll join our colleague Mary in America to share her mobility story.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, I'm Mary Elbeck. I am the U.S. lead for Mobycon out of our Durham, North Carolina office. And my sort of biggest leap into this field, I guess, happened as an undergrad in college. I had heard this number that Danes are use 25% less energy per capita than Americans, and then this just really stuck out to me. I was like, well, are they just 25% better people than us? I don't think so. So what is it that that makes them that much more environmentally friendly? So I had this opportunity to study abroad in Copenhagen, and went over there with this idea of figuring out how they did it and kind of bringing those ideas back to the States. And as soon as I got there, I just sort of fell in love with the city of Copenhagen, and this whole vision of people, everyone getting around on bikes, women pushing these beautiful prams to cafes, and middle schoolers hanging out with their friends, getting around to the movies on bikes, and that just really appealed to me. And so I sort of narrowed in on the active transportation side of how to become more environmentally friendly, and just wanted to sort of stay there for a while and learn everything I could about how Copenhagen got to where it was. And through that, along the way, ended up meeting some wonderful folks at Mobycon and Elizabeth, and just along the way sort of learned how thoughtful the Dutch approach really is, and in terms of how they're able to connect mobility to the human experience. And so just became really eager to bring those sort of best practices, ideas, and approaches to the States for inspiration and working with communities over here. So that's a bit about my mobility journey, all of which was made possible and supported by professors and family members and some really wonderful bosses.
Thanks, Mary. It's so interesting how we all have these really different stories, and I think that's really important to remind people everywhere, is that we all come to this differently for different reasons, but I think a lot of us all have a similar goal. But I'm going to pull off what Mary just said there and ask, well, I'll start with Shelley. Like, you said your grandmother was part of your inspiration, but was there anyone else that, or any other organizations that really helped to get you motivated?
Yes, certainly. And I think the freedom part of like enabling people to do what they want in their lives, mobility is a part of that. So for me, it's that really interesting. And of course, you also reflect that on yourself. So what kind of decisions do you make, and what kind of influence do they have on other people when you decide on driving your car everywhere? And I think besides that, so really the personal, the people that were able to give me the insights about freedom. I also think you make decisions personally and then realize you enjoy it a bit more or in a different way. I think, as you also previously said, that when you walk in a city, you enjoy that, you also realize maybe you enjoy it even more by being active and being out meeting people instead of being in your own cube of a car, kind of.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting for me, and Mary, you had mentioned Copenhagen. I think for me, I knew of the Dutch cycling culture, but it was actually influence from Copenhagen that started me on this journey too, in that I got to meet Michael Koval-Andersen, and also we had coordinated a group in Vancouver called Vancouver Cycle Chic, part of the whole Cycle Chic movement. And I think that group of people that I was working with to be creative in terms of showing how normal cycling could be was also part of this like push to keep challenging everyone to think differently. Yeah. And what about you, Sophie? Was there anyone like that really sort of inspired you to, or helped you to get to this point that has stuck out? And it's okay to say no. You can say no, I'm completely on my own here.
Yeah, I think just having good conversations, like also with some people at my university, and talking about, you know, how we experience different environments, and what fascinates us, and what change we want to see. I think that kind of influenced me probably also to think a bit about, okay, what do I want to do? What can I do? In what direction can I go? Yeah.
And to briefly chip in, if that's okay, I realized that for loads of people which don't grow up in the Netherlands, kind of have like, if they see other places where cycling is perhaps more normal or more common, let's put it that way. I think growing up in the Netherlands, you actually have to make that flip around the other way. So you need to realize, okay, cycling is really normal and common here, but it's not in other places. And why is it? And so I think it's interesting for me to hear those like moments that you feel like, oh, this is the switch, kind of. Well, I think I kind of had to make it
in the reverse.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually, Elizabeth, so that was your experience, is you'd had grown up in a largely car-oriented lifestyle, and then there was that switch. You know, I'm curious, you know, as you've gotten further into the field, you know, what sort of, I know you've worked in different areas of mobility, so what was sort of the catalyst, or were there any sort of specific moments in your career that really stand out as like really impactful in terms of continuing on that journey?
Certainly there are so many, and I had the opportunity to kind of start my career more in public transit and then shift more to kind of working with municipalities, kind of at the national level. But when I start to think about what is possible for mobility and for women, and when I kind of reflect often because of the work that I do, I often reflect on what I experienced and saw in the Netherlands. I think one of the things that still inspires me today is similar to what Shelley was talking about, is seeing elderly women on bicycles. When I saw that for the first time as a 17-year-old girl from Canada, I had no idea that was even possible. A lot of the women that I grew up with in Canada that were of that age, they just seemed very fragile to me. And I know that they had very limited options at their disposal for mobility, which is a really big difference. And I just remembered seeing women in normal clothes doing shopping and cycling together, chatting, laughing. They looked so healthy, they looked so happy, they looked young and vibrant. And it really opened my eyes because I saw it and I experienced it and saw that it was possible. I don't see a lot of that yet. It speaks to at least where I am. There's a lot of work to be done to kind of get things to that point, and that's part of why I do the work that I do today. And certainly it's a lens that I bring to the work that I do. And I think even during these challenging times with COVID, it's really exciting how we've been doing some of these virtual study tours for people, because it gives folks from around the world the opportunity to kind of see a little bit about what is possible in other places and get inspired.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually reminds me, so my husband Chris and I just had the opportunity to speak at the National Bike Summit, and we provided a study tour. And there was one moment that I called out during the tour afterwards where you see an old woman with a walker in the bike lane, and it's just so completely normal. And then 5 minutes later, you see someone on a mobility scooter, and it's just that freedom of mobility that lasts well into old age that I think is really inspiring. And then on the flip side, like my own, I think, switch moment in terms of Dutch cycling and Dutch mobility was when we came here in 2016 for the first time, and I saw young girls cycling around, and for me, raising a young girl at the time, to see what would be her peers cycling in groups and being able to experience the city without mom and dad chauffeuring them around, that was sort of like, that's when I saw that, I said, that's what I want to bring back to North America, and that's what I want to push for elsewhere in the world. I think we can't underestimate, these opportunities for freedom and independence for women, both young and old, and the inspiration that can provide. I'm curious, for Sophie, I mean, you've lived in a bunch of different cities, having lived here in the Netherlands now, what is sort of like something that surprised you at first when you arrived here in terms of how people move through the cities, or what stood out for you as something pretty special?
Yeah, good question. I think it's already only the fact that you see way more people walking and cycling. So it's just like, walking around. I feel like there's always like a nice dynamic to it, and you see people everywhere, because a lot of the time, if you take Luxembourg or Germany, depending on where you are, it's often just, if you walk, it's kind of isolating, right? Because there aren't a lot of people who do it, and I guess also, again, the way you then design the public space to accommodate for the mode that you try to push, it's way nicer here because there's more greenery and you see people playing on the street. It's just, very, you see a lot of life, and I really like that.
Yeah. And Mary, when you were talking about your experience, you had mentioned seeing the women with pushchairs, and I'm curious now, for those that don't know, Mary is a relatively new mom. Has that changed how you think you might approach mobility, or how you're moving around your city now in terms of some of the choices you're making?
So right now I'm living in a rather car-centric suburb. So I think unfortunately it just makes me realize how good it could be. And then sort of recognizing that that's not the situation we're in right now. But uh, it does make me realize how important that is. And then on the flip side, does also present the fun challenge of coming up with positive things about living in the suburbs, which is maybe something we don't talk about quite as much in our field. So that's sometimes I feel like I know too much about how good it could be.
But I think that's a good point that you make about the suburbs. And, when we think outside, oftentimes with our work, we're so focused on promoting the Dutch approach. But I think having that lens that you have and Elizabeth and myself, not that you don't, Shelley.
No worries, no worries.
but the rest of us all have this experience of growing up in more car-dominated environments. It certainly, I'm sure, informs how you approach design and planning, especially, with that personal experience yourself, Mary. I guess what I'd want to know then is, based on your experiences so far, based on your mobility stories and the experiences you've had here, how has that changed or impacted your lifestyle or affect your choices that you make? And Shelley, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think I definitely have an impact on the people around me. And you'll probably recognize this in the sense of, oh, you are the person that often buys bikes or encouraging other people to go with you and to be, so I think that influenced my personal life as well. And I definitely think about why I travel somewhere and how I travel there. Maybe it's interesting to know that I'm quite a fond car driver, to be honest. Maybe also because when I turned 18, I didn't drive as crazy as other people. So I still have that feeling like, oh, I kind of enjoying this. So there are like so many sides of traveling around and what you can enjoy by doing that, by just traveling around, looking out your window and discovering new places, seeing new areas, meeting new people. But I think I'm definitely have a kind of a critical opinion about what is the thing that I feel comfortable with and what I'm preaching for during my work. And in essence, for me, it's also really about creating spaces which are enjoyable and livable for everyone. So mobility is a part of that. That's kind of a tool to create that. And I'm sure it's easy to focus on cities, but I think it's very interesting, as Mary just shared, that it's not only about cities. And it's very interesting as well to talk about other areas or recreational cycling, or just how can we make life as enjoyable as possible while moving, if it's for fun or going from one place to another. So I definitely reflect on that during my personal life, and I'm sure I have influence on others if they are part of my journey. And most of the time people enjoy that, and they are open for conversations as far as I experience. Maybe I have otherwise maybe I don't notice it, but as far as I experience it, people enjoy that. But I think I have a critical look at your own decisions and choices.
Yeah. And Sophie, I know a lot of times you like to focus not just on the mobility, but the whole city. And I know that you selected Rotterdam in part because that's where you were studying. But when we did the tour together, it seems that there's a lot about that city that really speaks to you. And I wonder if, as a woman and as moving through the city and as experience in public spaces, if that's part of the decision to stay and settle for now in Rotterdam.
Yeah, I guess it definitely is because, it's also, you wouldn't choose somewhere to live if there isn't a good way for you to move around, to get to work or meet friends. So Rotterdam just has offered me everything that I want and more. So I think that definitely contributed in me wanting to stay. And
Elizabeth, I'm going to throw it over to you and just ask, with everything that you've learned so far and everything you've experienced, what sort of impact has that had on you, whether that's career-wise or decisions you've made there, or even in your personal lifestyle, because you're also a parent as well. How do these experiences affect those choices?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I mean, of course, I think when you work in this field, you kind of see how it all is interconnected, right? And I think often we're asked to kind of lead by example when you work in this field, especially when people know that you're the transit person or you're the bike person. So many times I will come to a meeting and people will kind of at a certain point ask, so how did you get here? And I don't know what they're expecting to hear, that, I always joke, I have my Hummer parked in the parking lot or whatever it might be. But certainly this, interest in leading by example, but also kind of personally having that quality of life has been really important to me. It's impacted the places I've lived. Of course, it impacts the way that I'm raising my two daughters and very much wanting them to have access to independent mobility in a way that makes sense for them. Certainly, our quality of life was increased quite a lot when our family decided finally that it was time to add a cargo bike to our fleet of bicycles. And it's kind of my favorite way to experience the city with my kids. It means that I can take routes that I might not feel comfortable going if I were kind of cycling with them because of speeds or lack of light or whatever it might be. And it's also kind of my favorite way just to kind of interact with people, because people are very curious. There's more and more cargo bikes coming in Canada, but they're still relatively new. And it's amazing how many people come up and talk to me, all types of people that have all kinds of questions, or even just kind of watching them from a distance and just kind of seeing how they're looking, like, how does this work? And where do you sit? And think about all of the things that you can carry with you when you have a bit more space.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think when we were chatting about this beforehand, I mentioned, Elizabeth, that I was considered the biking mom for a really long time. And if I didn't show up by bicycle, I'd somehow let the tribe down. But I think one of the things for me, I mean, aside from moving my family across the Atlantic to the Netherlands, obviously that's had an impact on some of my lifestyle choices. But I think being in this field of larger urbanism as well, and interacting with various women, or hearing statements like there aren't a lot of women in this field or there aren't a lot of experts, made me really determined to, it's just my nature, to push against that and say that's not true. And yeah, that's been a lot of how I've approached a lot of my work since then, is showing that there are other women working in the field or helping people find those opportunities, so that we can, basically make things a little more gender equal, hopefully. I think what I think was really inspiring for me, or almost like it made me feel so good, was I had started a small section of the blog called Women in Urbanism, featuring people in BC at the time that I knew, and then I found out that there was an organization in New Zealand that started this whole working group to try to lift up the voices of a lot of women, which was really fantastic to hear, and it made me feel really warm and fuzzy inside. But yeah, I think that's, for me, that's part of the journey, is making sure that I'm leaving space for other people to share their stories and be able to lift other women up. And I know, Mary, you and I are working on a project that I think kind of looks at how people experience space. And I know through that work, we've been able to talk to a lot of women from other groups that maybe aren't highlighted as often. And I wonder, if you want to share a bit about that experience of working with women from maybe lower income groups, or the Latin community in nearby to where you're living, and what sort of you're learning through that process as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. I think that project has highlighted sort of the feeling of personal security in being able to get out and be more active in your surroundings. And that was something that I experienced too, that just in Denmark, one of the things I noticed was that I almost felt the safest when I was on bike. I mean, the infrastructure was there, and then you just, there's not the feeling that I think we're all pretty familiar with, being in a parking garage and kind of checking behind your shoulder every few minutes. And so that feeling of personal security is quite present for them. And I think one of the things with that project that we've seen is that they do have lots of really strong ideas in terms of how to improve their community, but it takes a lot of effort on our part as planners, practitioners in the field, to reach out and make sure we're getting that insight from them, because they're, not everyone is sort of familiar with the process of how you provide feedback and give that input to your local decision makers. So that's one of the things that, just in terms of improving gender equity and supporting women and minorities, is really making the extra effort and outreach to hear from people that we don't always hear from.
That's an excellent point. And I guess building off that idea of like supporting each other and supporting hearing different voices, I'd be curious, I'm going to ask the two younger colleagues sitting next to me, you're still relatively early in your career, but I guess knowing what you know now, is there any advice that you would give to fellow women who are studying or interested in getting in the field, things that they should consider, things they can do to sort of launch their mobility career?
Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
Chip in if you like, please feel free to do so. I feel in any field probably it's very important to feel confident about what you're doing. I think there are quite some women, and I'm sure there are also men, but they are like kind of feeling like doubting themselves, doubting their strength. And I think especially when you're new in your career, everyone has doubts. So I really hope that everyone who is starting in our career feels motivated and feels like I can be here and I can share my thoughts. So please do that in any field you're going to work. And also share your ideas, share your thoughts, make your own voice heard. In that way you can also make other voices heard. But I think it's really important to feel comfortable and do that yourself. Thinking about this question, I'm also very curious now with all the digital ways of working, and I'm definitely liking it. In a sense, it's great to have this talk with like our overseas colleagues. But I'm wondering if it might have some impact on young people in any field, and because somehow I think if you're new, it's also nice to chat with each other during lunch. It's already sometimes difficult to ask your manager or your director and knock on their door and say, hey, can I ask a question? And how more difficult it might be if you need to do it online or via a phone call. So I think having these social interactions, I'm wondering if that might have a negative impact on young women, might have also a very positive impact. I'm not sure, but I think it's something to be very aware of. And why this came into my mind is because I have one female friend, and she's really tall in the sense of probably just like Dutch standards, long, very tall. But it's interesting because we chatted lately, and she said, I feel like if I meet men in person, they are imitated by her length.
Intimidated, yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. But because she's now only on screen, she has a very different experience as a woman. And I'm not tall myself, so I never had that feeling. But I think it's very interesting how she shared that, because she feels like if a man is shorter than her, she's kind of easier to overrule him. Yeah. And now, so I would like to pay attention to what does it mean for young women in the fields. If you don't, your position isn't settled yet. You still might need to have that social interactions, that kind of in betweens. And I think the work culture is very important. That I think it's something to be aware of for the future.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, something I think when you're constantly online, you may not. Constantly online and as part of your day-to-day, you might not think of.
Yeah, and at the same time, it can also equalize person. So it might be two-sided and depends on what kind of person you are, if it gives you benefits or... And so I think somehow it can equalize with the mute button or so, but on the other hand, you also need to have the courage to push forward if you want to talk. So if it's digital or not digital, you always have these issues. But I do feel like there's something with the online and something being new in your work.
Something to consider as we move forward, because this is our reality for
Yeah,
a little while.
yeah, and it's great to cherish all the positive sides, but
Yeah.
also I think being aware of.
Of course. And what about you, Sophie? What would you add to that?
Yeah, I think already Shelley had some good points, and I agree. I would just suggest be bold, don't be afraid or intimidated, and just go for it, even if you don't tick all the boxes. For example, if you look at what people are looking for, or if you think, maybe I didn't study the right thing, or I don't have enough knowledge yet, it doesn't matter, just try, just apply anyway. I think that always is already the first step that you should take to achieve something. I mean, worst case, you don't have anything to lose, and you just try, and you might get the opportunity to end up where you want to be.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. One that I often share is that I studied fashion design, and now I'm working in mobility. So I took a chance and ended up here, and it's been a good decision.
Yeah, it's very nice to hear that. Like, I really like it how you can end up somewhere else. What for me also really helps, and it's important to have role models. I know it's kind of an easy thing to say, but for me, I really believe in that, and I feel like the role models are there, should be seen. But as like growing up and being young, for me, role models were the women part-time working. So I think there's still a bridge to make.
Well, that's an excellent way to segue over to North America, because Mary and Elizabeth, you've both been not working ages in the field, similar length to me, but I think we all have this experience we bring to know what could be helpful for leaders and people working in higher positions to know in terms of how do we elevate and really support the next generation, but also the current generation of people and women working in this field. Why don't I start with Mary?
Okay, thanks. This is a really important question, and I sort of came up with three ideas or three sort of core things that kept bubbling to the surface. So the first is kind of like my response to your last question, just in at least when it comes to hiring, the majority of people we still see in this field are men with fantastic experience. But I think if we make an extra effort to reach out, that's sort of on us to make an extra effort to reach out to diverse organizations to encourage more women and minorities to apply for positions. Maybe they're not seeing the posting or aren't quite sure. So, putting that extra effort in on our hiring. The second thing I thought of, and this is very much from my experience as a new parent, the parental leave policy is very important, and I've been really lucky to be at Mobycon and have all of the support that they've given. But sort of in addition to that, I think thinking about really encouraging men to take family leave. So this one's more about the men, but just seeing that if or partners aren't able to take leave, it's very, very, I could see it being very easy for women to get into that primary role of caregiver. And then just, building on that, having, either less time for work or in reality, spending just as much time on work and then not getting enough sleep and increasing the likelihood of burning out. So really encouraging partners to take that leave, I think is just as important as the mat leave. And then the third thing I thought of, which is probably an easier change, is just calling directly on women. Particularly if we're the minority in a room, or even if it's a 50-50 gender split, I can sometimes still kind of feel like the minority. So having someone call you out specifically to speak up can make that can really help.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and it sort of builds on what Shelley was saying about the idea of like digital communication, and I think oftentimes it shows up in webinars and workshops that we all take part in, where there are certain voices that just don't feel comfortable speaking up, and I think that's an excellent point. Is when, Mary, if you see that, making that extra effort to encourage someone who probably has some excellent ideas, but is maybe a little more shy, giving them the opportunity to have the floor. And Elizabeth, I'm curious, from your perspective, building on what Mary's excellent response is, what else do you think we can be thinking about or doing, to really help build more gender equity in the work field, but also, in our cities?
Yeah, thank you for that. Certainly, I've seen a lot of different phases already in my own career. And when I started, it was hard because I would look around the room and there would be a handful of women in the room every time. And so that could be overwhelming. But at the same time, I've also kind of, as I've been in different stages of my life and needed kind of different types of support, I can see how the 9 to 5 work culture and just the expectation that you be sitting at your desk for this many hours a day and then kind of go home, it actually doesn't work for a lot of people, and actually doesn't work very well, especially for women that are often juggling so many other things in the background. So I think one of the key ways that organizations can help to kind of keep the women in their organization is to make sure that they offer flexibility. So this is the flexibility to maybe start a bit later, or to work from home, or to say, I really need that space in the office so that I can get some quiet focus time. Whatever that might be, providing those options, I think, is really important. But the other thing that I think we should also discuss is leadership, in part because in my own career, I've seen a lot of women that had potential to move up in an organization and be in a place to be making some of those decisions, but had to either step aside or step back as a result of things kind of going on in their life. Or maybe they just didn't feel supported enough to kind of move into that more senior leadership role. And just to echo what others have said, there are so many more role models now than there even were 10, 15 years ago. So that's very exciting, especially I'm speaking as a mother of two daughters. So these are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and also the role of mentoring. So I think we often talk a lot about how young women coming up in the field benefit so much from mentoring. And I've seen how that works, and I've seen how it's helped women to get certain positions. But I also realize that there's a need for mentoring at other stages of someone's career as well, because you're dealing with new problems and new challenges. And having a sounding board, someone to talk to, is really valuable. And then, for me, I always love the opportunity to talk to people that are just starting out in their career. I think it's so exciting. It fills me with hope. And I think if we all kind of take some time to do that and give back, we'll all be in a better place.
That is an excellent point, and thank you so much for sharing that. And thinking about that idea of having flexible time, I'm cognizant that we are all very busy, and we are coming to the end now of this session. But I'm sure we could keep this conversation going. I'm sure there are lots of questions out there, and if any of you are interested in carrying on the conversations, please do reach out to us. We're all on LinkedIn, where you can just tag Mobycon and we can make sure people are able to facilitate answering any of your questions. But how we want to close is by giving up to 5 words of things that we would hope for the future of gender equitable mobility and what we would hope to see. So I'm actually going to start with Mary, because I know we ended with you in the first round.
Okay. No more sketchy parking, cars, bikes, or otherwise.
Perfect. All right, Shelley, your turn.
Cherish the ordinary, promote walking and cycling.
Excellent. Elizabeth, your turn.
I just wanted to draw in a few words that I think I spoke about, and those are diversity and flexibility and choice, and of course, hope.
Awesome. Sophie?
5 words. Okay, I would say freedom, feeling secure, and having options.
Excellent. And then I will close it out by, I will admit I added one word, but only for emphasis. Greater inclusion, visibility, access, diversity, and celebration. So with that, I think this was an excellent conversation. I look forward to more of these conversations, digitally or otherwise, with my colleagues. And there are so many more women working here at Mobycon that I'd love to hear from. We obviously can only get a few of us in the studio, and we're happy to have us here. But if anyone else wants to challenge us to share some more stories, or we challenge you to share your stories, be sure to tag Mobycon. If you've enjoyed this session, you can like and subscribe here in the YouTube. We do have some sessions that are available for free, not just through the Academy, but we do encourage you to subscribe and join us. We have lots of great content coming up this month and the months to come. I want to give a thanks to our crew, Marijn and Mike, who are here for every session to make sure that we sound and look fantastic and everything goes smoothly. So thank you. Thank you again to Mary, to Elizabeth, to Sophie, to Shelley.
Thank you, Melissa.
And to all of you for joining us. And until next time.
Thank you.
Perfect.